Welcome to the webinar. We'll get started in about 2 minutes. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by the Congressional Cooperative Business Caucus and presented by NCBA CLUSA. On behalf of the team at NCBA CLUSA, we're so excited to bring you today's virtual briefing on co-ops in the food supply chain, resilience and innovation in response to COVID-19. Before I hand things over to today's presenters, let's just review a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar will run for approximately 1 hour. Attendees' audio will be muted for the duration of the webinar. If you have a question, please go to the question box located in the GoToWebinar control panel. Type your question there and we'll be monitoring them throughout today's presentation. And we'll do our best to get to your questions during the Q&A session at the end of today's program. Today's webinar is being recorded and a link to that recording will be shared via email next week. And now I'd like to turn things over to NCBA CLUSA President and CEO, Doug O'Brien.
Thank you, Liz, and thanks everybody for spending some time today on this really critical conversation in this moment where the cooperative community finds itself in this COVID, in this COVID situation. Thanks for joining NCBA CLUSA for a briefing in partnership with the co-chairs of the Cooperative Business Caucus, Representatives Jim Baird from Indiana and Representative Mark Pocan from Wisconsin. During COVID-19, NCBA is focused on ensuring that all cooperatives can access federal programs like the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program and the Paycheck Protection Program. In fact, we had some numbers that were publicly released a couple weeks ago that showed that because of the advocacy of the cooperative community, nearly 2,000 co-ops were able to access the PPP, saving jobs and really creating a critical bridge. As we look ahead to future legislation, we're working to include co-ops as a tool to help preserve businesses and grow new ones, not only to build a more stable and resilient economy, but to create a more participatory economy where more people have an ownership stake, as well as increasing investments in existing cooperative programs like USDA's Rural Cooperative Development Grant Program, which unfortunately has been appropriated stagnant funding for nearly a decade. In just a few moments, we will hear from several co-op leaders who work in our nation's food system, from the farm fields to the store shelves, on how they have navigated the challenges of COVID-19 and what policy reforms are needed to recover and to rebuild. Now, first, I want to thank Congressman Pocan and Baird for joining this conversation. As you might expect, and those who track the congressional calendar, know that this is quite a busy week for the House. Both congressmen are going to join us within the hour and hopefully fairly soon. One, I think, is finishing up a subcommittee meeting. The other one is working on some other official business. So we will be kind of nimble and flexible and look forward to them being with us when they join us, and we'll make some time certainly for them to make some remarks. I do want to mention for those on the call, and just to call out and really appreciate those staffers from the personal offices of the members of the Co-op Business Caucus, from the Ag Committee, from Appropriations, and from other places. We have a great representative group of staffers here today, so really appreciate you all being here. I'm going to pause just to make sure that that neither Representative Pocan or Baird are with us at this moment. I don't think they are. And assuming that's true, then I have the opportunity to introduce a colleague, a good friend, a great champion for co-ops and certainly for agriculture, Chuck Connor with the National Council of Farmer Cooperatives. Chuck, if you want to turn your camera on. Thanks for being here today, Chuck, and we look forward to hearing a few remarks, and we'll move forward. Thanks, Chuck.
Okay, well, Doug, thank you, and please interrupt me if either of our members join us, and that's just fine. But I do appreciate the opportunity to join this NCBA CLUSA webinar. Extremely important topic here as we attempt to begin the process of assessing a little bit, even though obviously we're not out of the mess of the pandemic, and in some cases that those numbers are moving in the wrong direction against us, and that we're all sort of struggling on how to respond and deal with that circumstance. But nevertheless, there is some assessing going on, and I will just tell you that from the world of farmer-owned cooperatives, as I have traveled around a little bit in the countryside and seen what's going on, it's remarkable to say that for the most part, with certainly some exceptions, but for the most part, we have had an okay year in American agriculture thus far. And I say that knowing full well that there are so many industries and so many people that are so adversely affected by this pandemic that, even mentioning something being okay is almost, intolerable. But I can't sit here in front of you and just say, that it's been crisis mentality out there this spring and summer in agriculture, because it hasn't been. There are crops growing, food, is being harvested. Things, again, are okay given the circumstances that exist out there. And I will just quickly reflect on why are they okay in the midst of crisis in so many sectors. And I think it really did begin early on in the pandemic when the Department of Homeland Security designated really all aspects of agricultural production as sort of being critical, and giving them emergency status where we were able from the very, very beginning of the food production process, which might have been, let's say, in a fertilizer plant or a seed plant or something like that, all the way down to the processing and retail sector, and the people bagging groceries and doing everything else like that. Those people were able to stay on the job, and consequently, food has not sort of been the second crisis, if you will, to go along with COVID-19. And that could have easily been the case had we not gotten that emergency designation. And many of you have heard that, some of the early drafts of that designation were not very encompassing of agriculture, and I believe would have created a circumstance where, in addition to worrying about their own health, people would have also had, many people would have had nutritional needs that could not have been met. And certainly even, down the road, if crops hadn't been planted, we would see the tail of that crisis in food availability, carry well into, next year and years beyond that as well. So that did not happen. We are so thankful for that. I will just say I am not ignorant to the fact that having workers on the job and having sort of near normal kind of workforce occurring, producing food during this time, has resulted in, as you would expect, in some circumstances and in some regions, higher cases of positives. And, this is something as agriculture we've got to really assess and deal with. I don't think there's anybody out there that doesn't want to create the absolute safest environment for workers that you possibly can. But, if in the middle of a pandemic, when they are on the job, that is going to create risks, and we need to figure out how to be the best we can possibly be on that. And that's certainly some of the assessment that is occurring now, but more needs to be done. And I'll just tell you that. I think co-ops will play a big role in educating processors and those people that are not sort of social distancing out there in rural America because of food production, to make sure that everything possible is being done to protect those workers and the producers out there that are clearly going to have to be on the job no matter how long this COVID crisis continues. So that's happening, but again, we're all thankful in the food business today, because for the most part, food is available, grocery store shelves are available. We're making food available to those in need, and the link between both preventing and overcoming COVID-19 and good nutrition is obviously one of there's many unknowns out there, but that's one of the knowns, that there's clearly a linkage there, and we need to make sure that food is not contributing to a worsening of this crisis going forward. Close. Doug, you need to interrupt? You're okay?
I do actually. Just learned that Congressman Pocan has joined us. So I really appreciate that, Chuck, and maybe we'll come back and catch up with you. But Congressman Pocan, if you are on, please either speak up or feel free to turn on your camera. And as you do that, just really want to thank you for taking the time and being part of this conversation today. You've got at least about, right now we got 82 folks on, and the numbers are growing still, from the co-op community across the food system, really, from the field all the way to the food co-op community are with us today. So are you on, Congressman Pocan?
I am. I just via phone, though. I just got off the floor. Sorry. But when you have events when we're in session, sometimes it's tricky, and I apologize for being late on the call.
Oh, no need to apologize. We're so grateful that you're taking some time. Please, we look forward to your thoughts here today.
Oh, sure. Well, again, thank you very much for inviting me here. And on behalf of the Cooperative Business Caucus, I just want to thank everyone for being here today to learn more about the role of co-ops in our food supply chain and how we're responding to COVID-19 pandemic. I'd like to thank a few folks, if I could. Of course, my co-op caucus co-chair, Jim Baird. Of course, Doug O'Ryan from NCBA. Chuck Connor from the National Council of Farmer Cooperatives. Chuck Spencer from Growmark. Jerry McGeorge from Organic Valley. Cornelius Blanding from the Southern Federation of Southern Cooperatives, the Land Assistance Fund. And of course, Kristen Moore from the Willie Street Food Co-op in Madison, which I am a member. Although I haven't been there lately, I've been in DC a little too often, Kristen. The shocks to the food supply system caused by COVID have hit Wisconsin and every state very hard, but food system co-ops have managed to respond to the challenges we're facing while navigating this unprecedented situation themselves. As I've said in previous remarks, these co-ops have existed for over 100 years. They're especially relevant today because of their values. Co-ops are moving us towards the economy we want, one that treats workers and communities with respect, and they provide high-quality jobs in workplaces that are democratically governed. I hope that this briefing will be a forum for food system co-ops and those of us in Congress to come together and talk about what cooperatives need to weather this pandemic and the way that these assets to our communities during these difficult times can continue to strive and thrive. And I just want to, again, thank everyone for joining us virtually today, and I look forward to this great discussion.
Congressman, thanks so much. Oh, go ahead.
This is Congressman Baird. I just wanted you to know.
Excellent. Well, you're right on time, Congressman Baird. You probably just heard your co-chair finish a few remarks, and I'd like to now hand it over to you. So glad that you could be with us, Congressman Baird. We've got about almost 90 people from both the food system, the co-op food system, from field all the way to food co-ops. We got a lot of congressional staffers here with us too. And thanks again for being here, and we look forward to your remarks.
Thank you very much for being here, and I appreciate everyone that's on the virtual, and I'm by phone, just like my colleague, Representative Pocan was in, and I appreciate and support the comments he made about all of you that are here and how important we think co-ops are to the food supply chain, and I hope we learn a great deal from having your presence and your discussion. So with that, I've witnessed the value of the good co-ops and the things that they bring to the workers in our neighborhoods. The principles of inclusion and cooperation lay the foundation for many of the communities to thrive. And so I compliment you on that, both from an economic standpoint, from a social standpoint, from the satisfaction or satisfying cultural needs. So throughout my district, co-ops are engines of economic growth, offering a dynamic and a flexible business model in production, in marketing, as well as service delivery. So we all know that the COVID-19 has disrupted this process to a significant extent in many places. So this public health crisis has forced us to take a look at many of the things that are important in how we are delivering our food supply. And I compliment all of you for being flexible, innovative, and coming up with the means to get our food to the people that we need it. And so with that, I just say thank you to my co-chair. Thank all of you for being here. And I apologize for not being able to be with you, but I'm in another committee meeting. So thank you.
Well, we certainly understand that, Congressman Barrett. Thank you for those remarks. And maybe right before you go, I'll talk on behalf of the panelists and much of the audience and thank you and Congressman Pocan for your work in these months. It has been a terrifically challenging time. As you both know, the co-op community has worked hard to make sure that that co-ops are considered in the different relief packages. You know, as Chuck Connor talked about before, to make sure that they were appropriately considered in terms of being an essential service, et cetera. So, but it was because of the leadership of you two and others in Congress to make sure that that happened. And you know that we're going to continue to do this work, and we are just so heartened to have partners like you for the co-op community in Congress. So we appreciate it. So I'll go back to the agenda, and Chuck Connor, I'm not sure if you want to have a final comment, and then we'll go to Chuck Spencer. So Chuck Connor.
Okay. Well, Doug, thanks for coming back, and really appreciate both congressmen' comments and their support for co-ops. It's just been terrific, and we appreciate everything that they have done. Two quick comments just to close up, and I do want to get to the panelists, but I will just say that we have been working so extensively on the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP. I think, as most of you know, in the co-op world, we basically deal with every time Congress comes up with sort of a new idea or a new business-related program. The first time around, they never quite think of co-ops and how they set these things up. And Doug and his organization and ourselves and others, I think, were successful in making sure that all of this program designed to help businesses was also available to co-ops. And farmer-owned co-ops took advantage of this. There were a lot of glitches in that we, won't go into, but, and it wasn't probably government at its finest, but there was a lot of assistance that was made available, and many of our members took advantage of that, and we'll be working with them to hopefully make sure that they will be able to continue to see those funds benefit their organizations and benefit their workers going forward. And finally, I will close by basically saying, in the midst of all of this COVID, there has been one issue that has sort of been the issue that has aged me substantially, and that is the 199A tax deduction. This is so important to co-ops. For those staffers on that have been around for a while, you will recall that this was the so-called grain glitch that Congress thought it fixed a couple of years ago. In the midst of COVID, Treasury decided to go forward with some regulations that, in our view, did not reflect the intent of Congress and did not fix the glitch, but actually exacerbated the glitch to the disadvantage of co-ops. And so we are desperately trying to get Treasury to modify those regulations before they go final. And I think Chuck Spencer will talk more about that. But just know that despite the fact that we are surviving COVID, which has been tough, there's a lot of storm clouds on the horizon, and 199A and the Treasury's rule is one of those storm clouds. So with that, again, Doug, thanks for the opportunity to be part of this group today.
Thanks so much, Chuck. And I really appreciate you both providing that context and bringing up some of those critical issues that we know there's some real work to do. And as with everyone else, we kind of have to deal on two tracks. We're dealing with the COVID, kind of COVID specific type of policies, but there's other things that need to get taken care of and some real challenges. And that 199A is certainly one of them. So Chuck Spencer with Growmark, I'll ask you to turn on your camera, and I'll let you introduce yourself, Chuck, and thanks so much for being with us today.
Doug, really appreciate NCBA CLUSA hosting this webinar, and particularly the chairs, Pocan and Baird, for also hosting the seminar, and so many who have tuned in. So we value your time, and we're going to get right to it here. Chuck Spencer, Executive Director of Government Relations for Growmark and the FS system. We have facilities within Wisconsin and operating under Inside FS and supply cooperatives in Indiana as well. Our operational territory would range all the way from the East Coast to approximately the Rocky Mountains in the northern portion of the United States, and then also Canada. We have three questions here that we're going to cover today with you. And it's important from the standpoint of our experience during COVID, programs that we participated in as co-ops, and then policy reforms and legislative packages that would be helpful for co-ops moving forward. And I'm going to share with you that our experience, you heard in the opening comments about our crops seem to be growing well. And it really started with that essential business designation, because our ag supply chain, we get one shot at producing a crop and harvesting it in North America. And we know that the COVID challenge is very real, but we also know that having and compounding it with any type of food shortage would be a real challenge. And so we were able to get that designation early. Our supply system was preparing and really worked overtime in doing so. Our specific co-op had a business continuity plan in place. Seems rather mundane to work through when the weather's good, but we were able to implement it. And only 12 people in our system here for the Growmark system had desktops. So we converted those last 12 to laptops, and we were able to work remote and really function fairly normal, given the consideration that was the first time we implemented a plan that we had been working on for the past 5 and 10 years. I think the other thing that's important is that we've also learned how to do virtual tools, much like what we're doing today. And I think for all of us, that's a real positive from the standpoint of learning how to connect remotely. Programs that we participated in and their assistance. I will say that the CARES Act and the Families First Coronavirus Response Act had provisions in there that were important to workers. We've seen an increase in 401k loans in our employee base as it relates to medical related debt. I think that's important to share with everyone. We also saw the PPP program as an integral part for some of our member cooperatives to participate in. One of the challenges we've also discovered is, though, that the PPP loan has kind of worn on the borrowers and participants because there's been a number of interim rules. We understand there's always complexity when rolling out a national program, but when the changes have become so frequent, I know that there's a lot of concern with everyone's best interest of compliance in a very full and proper manner. Are they getting to the compliance? So there's a little bit of stress out there to assure the foremost compliance is proper, but we also wanted to make sure that it was well known that that program has been utilized by systems across the country. Paid family and sick leave is very important for small businesses, because when you think about the quarantines that go into effect and how different states have been reacting to them, that's been important. So we've also heard from our employees about student loans, and they appreciate the student loan interest mitigation. I'm also going to mention hours of service exemptions for trucking. The ag supply chain, as well as many supply chains, rely on the truck transportation systems. States have flexibility as well as the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. And we want to make sure that that system stays in place as we know it today. It's provided great flexibility. It's been timely and responsive to states and the federal government. And we've been able to stay on pace with our food production system, getting it in the field, planted. We're fortunate to have Mother Nature deliver some rains There are certainly going to be dry spots. There's going to be places that are too wet in this country. There's a large swath of an area that got timely rains here in the month of July, which was critical for the formation of a solid corn crop and soybean crop. And then concluding here with policy reforms and legislative packages to ensure cooperatives can recover. I think what you heard Mr. Connor talk about when it comes to cooperatives and taxation, Congress and the Tax Jobs and Cuts Act tried to fix a lot of things, and they wanted to ensure that Section 199 operated the same way as it did prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Acts for cooperatives. And that's really important. If anyone has the opportunity to help us and put a message into the Department of Treasury to work with the cooperatives, we have a resolution we've shared with them in meetings just as early as last week. And we would like to see them work with us and get back to us about what we could do to work out a resolution to that tax law. I think the continuation of the essential business designation is going to be important. Hours of service reform, or the measures that we have for hours of service and how it works state by state and federal levels, going to be important. Infrastructure programs, looking forward to developing improvements in infrastructure to continue a world-class track for either road, river, and rail to get our products both domestically shipped as well as internationally shipped. And then we also seek a continuation for the need of new drivers within the programs for trucking. So a driver apprenticeship program would be good. Employee specific, the paid leave for sick employees was particularly helpful for small business. Increased health savings account and the FSA dollars to provide better tax benefits for paying for health care for employees, as you noted in the earlier comments I made about challenges employees are having, and then encouraging healthcare companies the best way possible to provide flexibility in payment schedules. I think those are some areas in which we can cover. And Doug, I'll turn it back to you or the next speaker here so we stay on track.
Hey, Chuck, it's a great set of recommendations and comments to make sure that the co-ops can get through this moment and build back even stronger. Really appreciate that. Cornelius, I'm going to tee you up to hit your button. Cornelius Blanding is the Executive Director of the Federation for Southern Co-ops and Land Assistance Fund. Cornelius happens to sit on the board of NCBA CLUSA, longtime board member, and does great service to his region of the country, to his community, and certainly to the entire co-op community. And he's a good friend of mine. So Cornelius, you're on, and I'll come on and give you a little warning when it's to give you kind of a 1 minute when it's time. So I appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Doug, and I'll make sure you don't have to give me that warning. So I'll try to be as brief as possible here. Well, first, let me thank Doug. Let me thank you and NCBA, the National Council of Farmers Co-ops, Growmark, Organic Valley, Wiley Co-op, and the Congressional Congressional Co-op Caucus, particularly Representatives Pocan and Baird, for really putting this on, and for all those listening and having us as a part of this. So I think this is a very timely conversation, and glad to be a part of it. I'm Cornelius Blanding, as mentioned, and I'm with the Federation of Southern Cooperatives Land Assistance Fund. The Federation is a cooperative association of Black farmers, landowners, and cooperatives all around the South. We represent about 75 co-ops, majority of those agriculture cooperatives, but represent about 20,000 individuals all over the Southeast. We work all over the Southeast, but primarily in about 9 states where we have some form of representation and or networks. 6 states where we have actual physical locations, staff, and membership that we work hand in hand with. But those are limited resource farmers and co-ops, which is something that is not always mentioned. And I appreciate both Chucks and their conversations about some of the tax deductions in the A199A. But those are some of the conversations that limited resource co-ops don't get a chance to have in many cases. And so what we're talking about here and what I'm thinking about is how do we figure out how do we engage all co-ops in those kind of conversations? Because when you have that problem, I call it a good problem. That means that there's some other things going on. But again, we played a huge role, and like all farmers and co-ops in this food system, and especially as it relates to this COVID relief. There was a huge role that our co-ops, our farmers played in our communities, play in our region and in this nation in terms of delivering food. And that can be seen in one thing in terms of this USDA food box program that was out there, which I think was a great program with many challenges, but has great intent. And we were one of the organizations fortunate enough to take part in it. And what thus far, many of our farmers and co-ops have delivered about 12,000 boxes of food over the last couple of months, which equates to about 300,000 pounds of food. And that's a lot in terms of really responding to this pandemic and making sure people who didn't have access were able to get food, fresh food, to be able to, as part of this response to this pandemic. So it's a huge role that Black farmers, their cooperatives played and continue to play and have played in every disaster because of necessity. Our organization is one that came out of necessity. Those co-ops came out of necessity for various reasons. And so being able to respond to that, like always, has been a huge role we've played. And when this disaster first hit, we as an organization first did an assessment of our membership. We did surveys of 200 farmers within the first weeks of this response, the first week of the shutdown, up to almost 300 after about a month or so. And so what we found is that roughly 82% of the farmers who have had their markets reduced because of this COVID impact, because of the pandemic. 70% of those had reduced incomes, and 65% there was a lack of resources that they had availability to, all because of COVID-19. And so there was a huge impact on our communities. I do agree with Chuck Connor that agriculture is okay during this time. However, there are some who are not situated in the same way. And so I call it the two faces of agriculture. And many of our farmers were directly impacted, and things weren't so good because their markets were those restaurants, those farmers markets, those things that were disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so really working through that has been a struggle for many of those farmers, those Black farmers and their cooperatives. But again, there are things that have been put in place by this government, by the administration, that has been a relief, and particularly this food box program with all of its challenges. And so we look forward to really figuring out how do we continue to engage the government, the administration, and participate in these programs that are very beneficial, but also really looking at the downsides to them and some of the challenges with them and getting better. Because Doug, as you said in the very beginning, having ownership stake in this is one of the most important things, and really fighting to make sure that Black farmers, landowners, and cooperatives have an ownership stake also in everything that's going on, from this response to the pandemic, but also the long-term responses that farmers have always played a role in. We think farmers are first responders, and they should all be treated like that, and also Black farmers and their cooperatives. So we look forward to this conversation today. There's many more things I have to say, but for the sake of time, I want to yield back to you, Doug, and listen for the other panelists.
Cornelius, thanks so much. Really important comments from the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, and I think it does begin to point out how, as with other sectors outside the co-op community, that the COVID-19 it's affecting different players within co-ops in different ways, and we just so much appreciate that Congress understands that there are different situations and helping to try and respond and meet some of those different challenges. So Jerry McGeorge is the Director of Corporate Affairs with Organic Valley, the crop co-op. Jerry, you can turn on your camera if you'd like. Jerry also serves on our board. In fact, a number of years ago, served as the president of the board for NCBA CLUSA. He's a great champion, certainly for his farmer members of Organic Valley, but a true champion for the cooperative community. And Jerry, thanks for spending some time today. We're looking forward to your remarks.
Great, thank you, Doug. And like a couple of others, I want to thank both Congressman Baird and Pocan for being a part of this as well. I also want to echo something that I think was said a little bit ago, which is to thank both Doug and Chuck and their organizations for their tireless work to make sure that any of these programs that we might be talking about, that co-ops are being part of that conversation and ensuring that we're eligible for these things and that kind of thing. So a little bit about Organic Valley. We're located in Southwest Wisconsin. We have about 2,000 farm members, and they're spread across about 35 states. And what we do is 100% organic. All the products that we're selling are USDA organic certified, and we cover a pretty wide range of products: dairy, eggs, meat, produce, and grain. But when we think about our co-op, it's informative to know about 90% of our sales come from our dairy division. So in a real way, very much a dairy organization. As I think about the effects of COVID on our co-op, I really kind of feel lucky, and I feel blessed. I think Cornelius talked about the food service, and I think we're all aware that food service really bottomed out through COVID. And we do have a small food service presence, but by and large, we're selling into retail locations. And so I think what we've seen is, back in the sort of March, April timeframe, people were doing, pantry stocking, going out and buying additional products and filling their pantries and their fridges. And that led to a bump in sales for us. And I think then as we continued to be in this situation of limited social movement and that kind of thing, one of the things folks are doing, you might think, well, economic uncertainty and organic products command a premium in the marketplace. Maybe people move away from them. And we've actually seen sort of the opposite, that without the opportunity to go out to restaurants and things like that and spend money, a lot of consumers are sort of treating themselves through their purchases in grocery stores. So that has actually helped us, and we've been doing pretty well. I will say, like, I think many of the organizations, suddenly in mid-March, we were in a position where we had to pivot pretty quickly, and about 60 to 65% of our workforce is office. And so in a very short period of time, moving somewhere around 600 people into a work from home environment. And that was, a challenge. The other 40% though are production workers. And, I just want to spend a couple moments on the employee side before I jump into some of the policy side. We've gone to great lengths with these folks. I mean, obviously, like any of these other food production locations, they've got to come on site. They've got to do that work. And so we've tried to recognize them. We've instituted something that we call hero pay. We've been paying them an additional $2 an hour through this. We've been providing them food on the job. We don't particularly want them bringing food in from outside, so we've been able to do that. And gone to great lengths to try and create some separation of our shifts in our facilities, so that again, we're creating situations where we're trying to create as safe an environment in those production facilities as we can. If I start to think about how some of the various programs have affected us, it's really a story more about how they have affected our farmers. The organization, the co-op itself, has really not been in a situation where we have taken advantage of some of the programs out there. We've certainly looked at some of them, but more it's been helping our farmers. And so Organic Valley has played a key role, I think, in facilitating for our farmers knowledge of programs that they might be eligible for, and in some cases, some assistance in ensuring that they're able to navigate, applying for these programs and that kind of thing. So I think a couple of these have been mentioned, but we definitely have farmers that have been taking advantage of the Paycheck Protection Program, and a similar program, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. So if we've got some farmers that do have, workers on their own, and so these have been programs that they have been able to take advantage of. I think, though, the very most impactful one for us is the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program. And within this program, there was some direct relief made available to some farmers. And in our case, our dairy farmers and our grain farmers were able to access this program. And it's had a very significant impact. I cannot stress that enough. So for a dairy farmer, in our case, our organization really works with smaller family scale farms. And so an average for us would be let's say a 75 cow herd. And so when we look at this CFAP program, we have been able to look at it, and you know, the average relief that a farmer for us is getting is $18,000. Now, to put that in a little bit better perspective, perhaps that means that that's a 20% premium or payment based on what we would have expected their annual income to be. So this has been a very significant program, and we spent a lot of time with this program in terms of, as I said, making sure our farmers knew about it, knew how to access it, providing them with records about their past year's production, because this is really what was being used to base the payments on. So this has been extremely meaningful for our farm base. If I look at the future, there are a couple of things that really we have been tracking and have supported. And so there's a couple of proposed pieces out there right now. One's called the Food Supply Protection Act. And this is coming out of Senator Stabenow's office. And then another one that's in some ways similar called the Farming Support to States Act. And Senators Baldwin, Collins, and King are sponsoring this one. And I think both of them have some similarities in that they're focused on helping to promote supply chain resiliency. And so I think, you know, in a broad sense, some of the things that these proposed pieces would do would make funds available for very direct COVID-related things. So if you're needing personal protective equipment, in our case, maybe there might be some retrofitting that needs to occur within our production facilities. And things of this nature, and these programs really are designed to help with those kinds of things. What I know right now is with the Senate looking at what this next program might look like for some economic assistance. I believe that these two are in the mix, at least in terms of conversations, and we may see some or all of the provisions included in a package put together by the Senate. So those are a couple of, COVID related, but there's one other thing I want to bring up that we knew was an issue before COVID, but COVID has exacerbated it, and that's rural access to broadband. And, in our case, not only have our employees had to go remote, but our interactions with our farmers have had to go remote. And so ensuring in the rural areas that we have that is really important. So one of the things we've done recently, and I believe, Doug, NCBA as well, Land O'Lakes is heading up a coalition that they're calling the American Connection Project that is really looking at that issue. And I think this is a super key issue, and timing may be right to be able to push it forward.
Yeah, Jerry, thanks for all of those great comments and recommendations. And we, NCBA CLUSA is part of that coalition. I know NCFC is, others perhaps on the panel. That issue around broadband, I'm glad you brought that up. So like so many things with COVID, it has emphasized and exacerbated some critical challenges that people already face, and that's certainly the case with broadband. And I'm really looking forward to Kristen more. I just want to mention, Kristen, you're welcome to join here. Oh, you're on phone, so we'll
yes,
I'll turn it over to you in just 1 minute. But I do want to emphasize one thing that Jerry said that I think probably all the co-ops and co-op organizations on here today, it's consistent with how Organic Valley focused on their members in this moment. And it's one of those distinguishing factors between cooperatives and other types of business associations, of course. Cooperatives they're owned, they're controlled, and they benefit the people who use the business. And we've seen some real advantages to that business model in terms of how the members are treated, and how the community is treated, because those members, they're in the local community. They want to make sure that the local community has the resilience to survive. So I think co-ops have really shown in this moment, and Jerry, you provided some good examples there. So Kirsten, with the Willie Street Co-op in Madison, Representative Pocan mentioned he's a member, a longtime member, and really looking forward to hearing from another part of the food supply chain, and that's retail. So Kirsten, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Doug, and thank you to NCBA, CLUSA, Reps Pocan, and Baird for hosting this today and for including us. As Representative Pocan noted, we are a local grocer in the greater Madison area in Wisconsin, and we have 3 retail locations, a production kitchen, and a central administrative office. We're a consumer-owned cooperative with over 34,000 active owners currently and about $60 million in annual sales. And we also employ about 400 people in the local area. So we are very grateful to remain in business at this time and to continue to contribute to the local economy. A couple federal programs through the CARES Act that we interact with. We did receive a Paycheck Protection Program loan. We received about $2.5 million that we currently expect to be fully forgiven. We're using it for payroll, for hazard pay, and for employee health insurance benefits. We also implemented FFCRA leave on April 1st. We will be reimbursed for the cost of qualifying leave with tax credits. So by the end of June, a significant amount of leave had already been used by our employees, and we'll be filing for tax credits on our Q2 941 returns. We are also utilizing the CARES Act's 401k provisions. So these provisions allow for 401k plans to make CARES Act distributions, COVID-19 related loans, and they also provide for making extended loan repayment periods available for eligible participants. We actually implemented these provisions in our 401k plan on April 3rd. So overall, we've been okay-ish so far. Our employees and suppliers and our shoppers have pulled together to make shopping the co-op a really safe and positive experience for our community. And working together, as has been mentioned throughout, is what we're all about. That said, we did end our fiscal year this past June about 2 million shy of sales. And that's due to about 50% lower transactions in the last quarter. We're offering fewer services because some of our services are not available right now due to county orders. Our out-of-town commuting and seasonal customers are staying home, or they're out of school. And grocers we're in a penny business that relies on 1 to 2% profit. So as the pandemic settles into being a long-term reality, we're considering how we will continue to navigate the waters and all of the additional costs we are incurring to keep our cooperative and community fed, safe, and employed. So I think I'll touch on, to wrap up for our section, a couple of different needs. We think it's really important to provide additional FFCRA paid childcare and transportation costs for all essential workers, and to provide government paid hazard pay to all essential workers. I should also note that it's really important to recognize grocery workers and food producers as essential workers when making these provisions. We also think it's really important to provide federal funding to grocers to purchase for COVID-19 sanitation equipment and PPE for our employees. And to provide more for those who are food insecure. It's very challenging for people in our community right now who have low income or inadequate housing to purchase large amounts of groceries all at once. And sometimes it's difficult for them also to prepare meals due to time and space constraints. So food insecurity is rising across the country due to unemployment, and this is going to have long-term impacts both on individuals who are at risk and on the food industry. So anything that we can do to supplement income at this time is going to be really important to recovery. We also think it's important to work towards mitigating the cash and coins shortage that we're seeing, because this also hurts people who might not have ample access to credit and debit cards, and it makes it harder for us to serve our community when we can't guarantee that we can give change at the cash registers. And we're also looking for clearer communication at the federal level regarding the risks and safety measures to be taken to get a handle on this pandemic. Clearer communication is going to make it easier for employees and customers to go along with the changes that we need to make to stay safe and healthy. And those are my prepared remarks. So thank you very much.
Kirsten, thank you. A really excellent set of observations and remarks, I think, to round out, the different perspectives in the food system. So important. I have a couple other quick comments. We have some time for question and conversation. Just reminding the folks on the webinar here that you can ask questions. Feel free to use the chat box. There's some staff that are monitoring that and kind of curating, and then I'm getting those through my text. Or you can just email to info@ncba.coop, info@ncba.coop if you can't find that chat box. So feel free to send in some questions, and I'll field them for the panel here. I did want to mention, I know with the limited time, Kirsten, that we learned about another instance of what I think is kind of unique to a co-op type of community, and it really expresses one of our 7 principles, and that's Principle 6, cooperation among co-ops. We know that the Willie Street has been working with the Union Cab Cooperative Taxi to
Yes.
safely deliver groceries. You've been working with local farmers and local co-ops to produce food boxes. So that's fantastic. Do you have just 1 minute on some of that kind of Principle 6 work you're doing, and then we're going to move to the questions.
Absolutely. So we piloted a e-commerce program starting last August. And thankfully, that was really good timing for us to start embarking on a project like that ahead of the pandemic. When we started our pilot last year, we were doing about $1,200 in sales a week with about 11 transactions. And with the pandemic, we are now doing about just over $50,000 in sales a week and about 320 deliveries, which is still not quite meeting the demand. And that also sometimes means that we don't have enough, we have 3 vans for delivery, and sometimes that's not enough. And so we made a partnership with Union Cab, which is a worker co-op in town, to have them start delivering some of our groceries for residents in the area, which has been a really successful thing for us and good for Union Cab too, since not as many people are using cabs during this pandemic. And then we also have a lot of producers in the area who grow for cafeterias and restaurants that have been sort of left holding the bag. They have crops that they planted for the year and planned for the year that they aren't really able to move. And so our co-op has been working with some of those farmers to put together food boxes that are kind of similar to CSA boxes, but we, partner with a bunch of different farmers to put together a comprehensive box for our customers with a variety of different produce items. And then we offer curbside delivery or curbside pickup, I should say, of those boxes. It's a monthly subscription, and we plan on running it at least through September.
That's great. That's great. Those are some great examples of what co-ops are doing, and really appreciate your comments on some of the different policies. Again, folks, if you have any questions, please drop those in the chat box on the GoToWebinar here. Feel free to email them info@ncba.coop, and we'll make sure we get those. If we're not able to get through all of them, we'll field those and try to get those answered to the group. So Jerry, I actually got a question for you. And it's about those, I think a couple of those initiatives or those that policy that you mentioned that we're hopeful might become part of the bigger package. And as everybody knows, COVID kind of 4/5 or whatever you call it, Congress is in the midst of really working through that right now, and it's a very fluid moment. But the audience member here is interested in learning just a little bit more about those 2 pieces of legislation, and if there's anything, what's the best way to get involved with that? So, Jerry.
Sure. So, as I was talking about, I think both of them are really kind of focused on this concept of supply chain and resiliency around our supply chain. So, as I brought up, some of the funds might be, in our case, was something like, we want to make sure that those production facilities are safe. So if there's a need for equipment that can help with that. Yeah, I think they're designed to be fairly broad-based, right? So I gave an idea there, but I think that the broad-based nature of them means that each of the organizations might be looking at what is it that they need to help with their supply chain, and they are designed, as I said, to be fairly broad in their approach. And I think, one of the things we've done, particularly, I think, well, in both cases, we've signed on letter of support, working with, in the case of the Food Supply Protection Act, Stabenow's office. And so if people are interested in both learning more than I can provide in our brief time together, but also support, I would, say that you could, contact her office. And I think, in our case, Wisconsin-based, and the other one I talked about, the Farming Support to States Act, we worked, specifically with Tammy Baldwin, and did the same kind of thing, signed on with some level of support. Not sure, maybe Chuck Connor could add a little bit more to what I brought up. Don't want to necessarily put you on the spot, Chuck, but I'm interested if you have any insight beyond what I brought up.
Jerry, thank you for that chance. I would, echo what you said. I think what we're tracking most, and we've actually been working with the folks from Western Growers and the Florida Fruit and Vegetable Association, and coming up with some asks to be made, because it would really be helpful to get access to additional assistance for some of this, what I would just loosely call protective equipment. Mm-hmm. Again, I know there's some bad publicity out there going on right now, but I will just tell the folks on the phone, I don't know of any producer, any grower out there, any processor, that is really not very, very concerned about doing all that they can. And, in some cases there are risks, but doing all that they can to protect their workers on this. No one wants to do otherwise. In the world we live in, that would just be, in addition to being wrong, it would just be really stupid to do that. And so access to that, to the funds for that protective equipment is critical. Everything I'm hearing, what I've read about the package that Senator Hoban is putting together, he's basically, I think, reaching out to the House and saying, we want to work with you, and it's our desire to have a package comparable in terms of dollars to what you're doing. So I think that affords the efforts of Senator Stabenow and others who are trying to make sure we've got access to some of this funding, make sure that is available to us. Doug, you and I will be watching this closely, as will our team, because as we said earlier, typically when Congress comes in and tries to do this, sometimes do the right thing for businesses and provide help. Sometimes those, the fine print just doesn't fit, the co-op business model, and we'll have to be all over that to make sure that it does. But that's what we're looking at, Jerry, mainly right now is what you've described.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. And yeah, absolutely. This is, this is the work that we need to do. On that need for protective equipment, I think we've, I guess, frustratingly over this last, few weeks, maybe a month ago, we kind of hoped that things that we might, as a nation, really have a handle on this. And I think, we just are getting a more sober look that this is the long haul, and we really need to invest to protect our workers, to protect our consumers. So that's really important. Questions are coming in. We're getting really close to time. Cornelius, I'm gonna ask you a question, and I'll just let folks know, feel free to keep sending those questions in. We're gonna capture those in the next day or two, hopefully by the end of the week, I guess, but maybe on Monday. We're gonna send kind of a recap email to folks, and we're gonna capture those questions and get as many of those addressed as we can, and put that all in one email. We will be posting this. We have a COVID-19 resource page at ncbaclusa.coop. So feel free to check that out. And Cornelius, the question that I have for you is how your members in the Federation for Southern Cooperatives have been able to access the food assistance program for specialty crops, and farmers who lost sales that they had previously had to restaurant and food service. Has that program or other programs been helpful to the farmers that were really relying on those retail, those restaurant establishments?
Yeah. So Doug, I mentioned the surveys that we did, and I talked to you about the number of folks who were impacted. But also, we had roughly 92%, almost all of them said they needed direct financial assistance. This is farmers directly. But yet but 78% of them said they didn't even know about the assistance. Now, that doesn't mean the information wasn't out there, but I think Jerry brought up a point about broadband and about internet access. The way the information out there is relevant also. So you have many people who didn't even know about the assistance. But what we did, again, not only did we do those surveys, but we started figuring out how can we mobilize the cooperative community, get direct assistance out in the meantime until we started figuring out more about the PP program and EIDL and all the others. So there was a lot of assistance that has gone out, still going out directly from partners. We've had PPP equipment donated that we didn't get from any federal assistance. Cabot Creamery, Cabot Co-op, for instance, as an example, they sent PPP directly to one of our co-op facilities where we were sending boxes, food box. The first 4,000 boxes came out of Mississippi. We relied on the co-op community for those, and Cabot Creamery is a specific example. So we have accessed some of the resources, but for the most part, individual farmers has been a very disproportionate response to it. So many of them have not, and so we've been working closely. But also, as Jerry mentioned, that's been a challenge for us. Our organization is a very hand-to-hand type organization based on physical locations, physical staff going out providing direct assistance, and we were forced into a remote environment that we weren't prepared for because many of our officers don't even have the access that we need to communicate regularly. Right. You saw that specifically when we did one of the co-op roundtables. 2 of our members dropped off and they were trying to be in on just by the telephone. So we have very specific challenges that we've been trying to work through. So because of many of those challenges, we haven't been able to access all of the resources that have been out there, but we've been able to connect to the co-op community and deal with that framework and that network we already had set up to work through that. Now, what we have done, though, I think considerably well, is this food box program, where we've been able to access those resources and provide food directly to those communities who couldn't get it. And again, I talked to you about those 300,000 pounds of food that's been delivered okay, and we're doing that now in 3 states, and before this program is over, we should be around 4 or 5 states. So we're looking at it from as a regional marketing system through the channels, but we're also working with other folks in the co-op community, like the Neighboring Food Co-op Association, like Cabot Creamery, and others who've called us and trying to say, look, how do we continue to provide food after this program is over? And so what's most important for us is really taking those resources, identifying gaps, building on to the future of this, because this program won't last long, but it has filled some gaps around the food, but there are many other gaps that it hasn't filled for various reasons. So we're working to make sure we can fill those gaps.
Thank you, Cornelius. And I'll really appreciate people with more questions. We're at almost 5 minutes over, so I'm going to respect everybody's time, and I'm just going to wrap up here. But I think in many ways, Cornelius just did. Talked about how co-ops are doing everything they can to utilize the programs that Congress have created in this past 3 or 4 months. But at the same time, there's some gaps. And we look forward to working with Congress to fill those gaps. And thank you to the panelists, to both Chucks and to Kirsten and to Cornelius and to Jerry for your time today and really laying out, I think, some key issues and some key recommendations. And mostly thank you to Representatives Jim Baird and Mark Pocan for leading the Cooperative Caucus and for spending some time with us today. I know their staff was with us. Thank you to all the staff that were with us today. Final note, we always are looking to grow the Cooperative Business Caucus. If your boss is not a member of the caucus, please reach out to us. Reach out to info@ncba.coop. And finally, I do want to mention Kate Latour, who is the Director of our Government Relations. She is the person at NCBA CLUSA, who is the first conversation when you're talking about policy in building out the caucus, and did so much actually to put this conversation together today. So with that, we will post this. We're going to gather these questions. We'll try and turn those around by at least by early next week. And really appreciate everybody's time. Be safe, be healthy, and hope to see you down the road. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.